Welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought. I'm Mark Rechtin, Executive Editor of S&P Global Mobility. 5 years ago, the hype surrounding self-driving cars was at a peak. Any attendee at CES was barraged with messaging from numerous companies promising a future of autonomous vehicles whirring around the world's cities. But then a curious thing happened. Reality got in the way of optimism. Casting aside all the TikTok and Instagram videos purportedly showing cars driving themselves, automotive engineers discovered that perfecting this technology is really hard. Whether it's navigating the ever-changing roadway, vehicle, and pedestrian landscape, to differing regions' governmental regulations and tort laws, to the ethical foundations of the culture where the autonomous software is coded, creating a vehicle that can drive without human assistance has hit some sizable roadblocks. Oh, did I happen to mention that developing this technology is fearsomely expensive? S&P Global Mobility has been tracking these developments for the last several years and recently issued a reality check regarding the limited levels of autonomous tech the world will have in the medium to long term, all the way out to 2035. So instead of an iRobot or Minority Report scenario of self-driving everywhere in our personal cars, we instead are forecasting limited adoption of autonomous technology through robo-taxis in carefully geo-fenced areas. Joining us today to discuss the future of this technology are two subject matter experts from S&P Global Mobility, Jeremy Carlson, Associate Director for the Autonomy Practice based in Los Angeles, and Own Chen, Senior Principal Analyst based in Beijing. Good day to you both.
Hello.
I'll open the floor to Jeremy. Let's talk about this reality check. What was the reasoning behind S&P Global Mobility tapping the brakes on its forecasting for an autonomous future, and instead seeing automakers and suppliers concentrating more on level 2 and 2+ technology, things like smart cruise control and crash avoidance tech, as opposed to fully autonomous driving?
Well, these are technologies. This is a marketplace that we, as analysts, have been tracking and following for years. So while this is the first time we're speaking kind of externally and releasing this outlook for wider consumption, this really is the culmination of all of the events that we've been tracking, in particular over the last 5 years, since this hype cycle really got revved up in kind of the 2018, 2019 timeframe. And in that time, what we've seen is certainly slower progress in the development and deployment of autonomous vehicles, what we typically call level 4 or level 5 autonomy. And at the same time, we've seen a clear focus from automakers in two other areas using similar technology, but in different forms. Standardizing what we call ADAS or driver assistance technologies, the most basic things like crash avoidance technology, as well as more wide availability of these automated driving systems, the cooperative versions that provide a lot of utility to the driver, but don't have the same kind of requirements in terms of technical redundancy and capability to navigate all of these different challenging, scenarios that an autonomous vehicle might encounter.
So, quick follow-up. Most of what we've been discussing involves applying this tech to personally owned vehicles, but we are seeing some gains in what are known as robo-taxis, the commercial deployments in tightly cordoned areas with so-called level 4 technology. It's basically a self-driving taxi, but with some limitations. How do we see that playing out, and why more so in that segment than with personal vehicles?
So this is, on the surface, it's an easier path to market. And in a lot of ways, that's really what it comes down to. We're talking about technology that is rather new to the industry in some cases, in particular with things like LiDAR, especially this new generation of LiDAR. But it's taking all of these technologies that today are still rather expensive and finding a path to market so that the companies investing and researching and developing in this technology can actually, at least soon, derive some profit from their efforts. So robotaxis really do allow the system or the vehicle to be designed for a particular area to kind of limit the area of activity, or what we call the operational design domain, so that it's more predictable, but it still provides a useful service. Usually this is going to be in the most dense kind of downtown areas where there's a high density of people in a relatively limited geographic footprint. But certainly we expect to see that opening up over time. Now, we do certainly see some activity, some very specific applications in personal vehicles. For example, level 4 parking scenarios, where you might drop your vehicle off at the front of a garage and walk away and then recall it on your way back. But those are a little bit more narrow, and we certainly see robo-taxis being a place where the industry is kind of coalescing around the near term, trying to bring this technology to market.
Let's move to Owen. What's happening in the West isn't necessarily the same as what's happening in mainland China. Could you give us a primer on how the Level 4 technology is advancing there and tell us why it's moving so much more quickly?
As we can see that the BYD and Tesla are quite popular in China. The root cause is it follows the so-called NEV strategy in China. Mostly we say that the NEV strategy is the first half of the game. The NEV will first develop the battery technology in China, and furthermore, further fast develop of the digitalization and autonomous driving industry in the China market. And we think the smart vehicle is the second half of the game, and automated driving will be a key important player in this market. For the root cause, the automotive is an important industry for every country. So like Japan, Korea, and US and European countries, every country wants its local automotive brands have a good market share in the market, like Toyota in Japan market, Honda in South Korea market. As we can see, the China OEMs are quite poor. So we have you can see the local OEM follows the global giants like Volkswagen, Toyota. And Tesla is a good teacher for us. Tesla teach us how to make good battery cars and how to build a smart system like automated driving and digitalization. China industry see this a good opportunity. So it's a good chance to have this corner overtaking. So the BV strategy and digitalization and automated driving topics are quite popular in China. So we can see that the China OEMs wants to take the market from the global giants and also want to develop its own China-specific applications.
Okay, so you mentioned that domestic brands in China want to establish their foothold. Who are the key players that we should know about in mainland China, and how much of the tech is being created internally at the OEM level as opposed to tier one suppliers?
I would like to see this from capital and talent wise. I think in journal wise, there's no difference between suppliers and OEM because they have lots of capital and talent. For example, XPeng can hire lots of talents, can invest in automated driving, but also Huawei can also invest it. So Huawei can hire lots of people as well, and they paid in a good salary. But the OEM has a better position to be the in-house developer. For example, some OEM may not cooperate with Huawei, so the OEM has the good position to do the in-house development. As we can see that for the moment, leading automotive companies like big GVs are not the leaders in China for the automated driving industry. But the startups like XPeng, New, and Li Auto are leading the automated driving development in China because they use the in-house development for this technology, and they are much quicker than other OEMs. I think the in-house develop like startups have the opportunity to be the first mover of this industry, and suppliers who collaborate with the legacy OEMs can be the fast followers.
So let's take this back to Jeremy. We've been hearing some talk about the Chinese side of the equation. And while Westerners may not be familiar with the efforts of mainland Chinese automakers and tech companies, we do hear a lot from the likes of Mercedes and GM and, of course, Tesla. How would you rate their efforts so far, especially in regard to navigating urban centers as opposed to smart cruise control for highway driving?
Yeah, well, the urban centers, those complex, 360-degree driving environments are really complex. We've seen a few kind of different ways to get at solving that issue. Most of them are happening through the robotaxi field. Some of that occurring with OEM investment, including some that you mentioned, General Motors, for example, with Cruise. But with respect to kind of the traditional legacy automakers here, a lot of this has been focused on highway driving, or at least limited access roadways that are fairly a little bit more predictable than the urban driving scenarios. Both Mercedes and GM have brought interesting systems to market. Both have new iterations of those technologies coming in the very near future. But what I think is really interesting, and Owen kind of touched on this as well, with all of the EV manufacturers, despite what automakers have done, and including Mercedes and GM, deploying their systems on EV models, what we see from automakers in the exclusively EV space, they're bringing technology to market much more quickly. They're bringing it on new vehicle platforms that tend to be a little bit more agile. They tend to be a little bit more, software defined, which means they can be more agile in bringing features to market and continuing to develop those over time. If Westerners, may not be familiar yet with some of the brands in mainland China, they're certainly going to get some exposure, because they're doing some really cool things with regard to this technology specifically, and that clean sheet effect that comes with designing a vehicle from the ground up is proving to be a big benefit, I think, in this realm of technology.
So one more for Jeremy. The big obstacle for a lot of automakers is so-called level 3, and that's where legal liability in the event of a crash passes from the driver to the automaker, and in turn to any supplier that would have provided the software or other technology that goes on the car. Can you walk us through what this means in terms of why automakers are so nervous?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, right? They take liability. This becomes product liability anytime you step over this line into level 3. Now, the SAE levels, J3016, they're a useful tool. They've given some good structure and, shape to the industry in conversations like this, but it's a really messy area as well. It comes down to implementation. It comes down to who is responsible for observing what the vehicle is doing, for taking action, in particular in the event that something goes wrong or the system has to deactivate. And ultimately, that transition, if the driver is not responsible for constantly supervising and constantly taking that fallback action, then it's product liability, and it comes down to the automaker. This really is the reason why level 2 plus, as kind of an ill-defined industry category here, is so popular, because it brings new functionality in these automated driving systems. It delivers utility to customers, but it does it in a way that keeps the driver liability paradigm intact. Likewise, in the robotaxi space, we're seeing much more purpose-built vehicles designed without steering wheels, because it takes this question of transition of control completely out of the equation. Waymo had explored this in a lot of their studies, over the last 10 years, where they had kind of shifted back and forth between these different implementations, and finally have kind of settled on purpose-built vehicles without a driving component, because they know that human factors question is such a challenge. And that's really where we're seeing the industry kind of draw these lines, developing robotaxis as that form of implementation for autonomous technology, and then the vast majority of the industry still remaining firmly within this level 0 to level 2 plus space, where driver liability remains intact.
So we're talking national cultures here and tort law and things like that. Let's pass this back to Owen. We've seen it in our global consumer surveys. There tends to be a larger cultural, perhaps trust level reason that mainland Chinese citizens have embraced autonomous technology compared to the West. Perhaps because ownership of personal cars hasn't had the chance to be seen as a gateway to freedom. Perhaps any car, whether it's personally owned or autonomous, is seen as providing this freedom. Does that ring true to you?
Yes, I think I would like to touch two topics. Yeah, first is the the Chinese people are more likely to welcome the new technologies. Yeah. For example, the Chinese people like to try first and then see the results for the new technologies. The digitalization is really relevant, the new technology in China market, and the people like to use WeChat to order the food, and they can see the digital food menu in the WeChat, and also we use application in your smart cell phone to purchase the train tickets. For example, the people like me, I even have an automatic litter box for my cat. So the people in China are more likely to use the new technology compared with Western, like Germany. They may be more careful and they want to see the results, whether they have the risk for their life or not. Yeah, the China market and the consumers are different. A second, back to your question regarding the trust. Yes, the trust for the public transportation system is quite high in China because all the transportation system was made by government or national-owned companies. The trust for the public transportation system is quite high than other regions. And for the moment, the China traffic still have some issues. For example, when we drive car on the road, we follow the so-called first come, first in principle. So if you drive first, you can drive in this way with high priority. So it's still some issues we need to resolve. And in the current situation, the people use eye contact to communicate who will go first. And it sounds a little bit magic, but it works well in China. But the autonomous driving and also the future robotaxi and private autonomous driving cars can help us to solve this topic. So the autonomous driving can yield to the vulnerable road users by principle. They can yield to the pedestrian, bicycle and scooters and follow the traffic orders. I think the trust and also the traffic order can help on this topic to promote autonomous driving industry in China market.
Let's have some lightning round role-playing action. Jeremy, you are now the Chief Technology Officer at a global automaker. How much R&D spend do you put toward developing fully autonomous tech, as opposed to perhaps perfecting the ADAS systems that protect the vehicle, nearby pedestrians from collisions, while the vehicle is under human control?
Yeah, man, that's a challenging question, and lightning round is not going to do this justice because that's a deep one. Automakers are under such pressure right now to be profitable and to survive, especially as the economy tightens a little bit here. There's a lot of scale being built in the industry by standardizing ADAS. That is something that automakers have to account for because they're no longer able to charge, for these basic safety features. They have to put that camera, that radar into every vehicle, and they have to eat that cost. The natural extension of that is these automated driving systems that offer a lot of utility to customers. Customers have proven they're willing to invest and buy those options. And it's a really smart way to recoup some of that initial investment cost to meet kind of the basic safety regulations. That kind of near-term tangibility, customers who want it, technology that is ready to go, that has proven itself out on the roadways, that can be installed pretty broadly across model ranges. There's a lot to like about that. It also, not just for the automaker, keeps them moving, keeps them, generating and churning money, but it stands up the supply chain as well. And that's a really important thing that the industry needs to continue to support, because this industry doesn't work without a supply chain. So in our outlook, I mean, we're talking about limited volumes out through 2035, right? Under 1 million, under 800,000, in fact, for these mobility vehicles by 2035. It's not nothing, but in the scale of an industry, 100 million units a year or thereabouts, further out into the future, it is a relatively small share, and you can make some pretty good money, I think, by devoting your development into the automated driving space, and then that naturally helps you build the foundation to continue developing that autonomous level 4 technology further out into the future.
Okay, your turn, Owen. You are now head of strategic planning for a smaller mainland Chinese automaker with autonomous ambitions. At what point do you stop developing cars with steering wheels and brake pedals and just go all in on creating only autonomous robotaxis?
So in China market, I think normally we need to pay lots of money to educate customers there. And if I manage a small company, that means I don't have money to educate market. I hope the big market can be the pipeline, so they can educate the market at first time. And I will be the fast followers. The current human driving cars still have issue because they are not safety. I think they are expensive to take the taxi, but we have no better choice to choose it. So we can see that we will suggest people is more dangerous when driving. So we suggest human driver out of the traffic. So I think we still need around 10 years to see the wide adoption from autonomous driving. So I will not be the first mover for this topic, because a small company only can be a fast follower for this high investment industry.
Obviously, we've just scratched the surface of this issue, and our experts could delve much deeper into the challenges and opportunities facing automakers as the world navigates a transition between vehicles driven by humans and those piloted by machine learning. But our time is up. Thanks to our experts for joining us today, and thanks to you for listening. That was a lot to unpack, but I hope you all feel smarter and more informed for having tuned in. And if so, please share this podcast link with your colleagues and in your social media accounts. To read the article that accompanies this podcast, entitled Waiting for Autonomy, as well as to opt in to our newsletter that provides more information on this topic and others, please visit spglobal.com/mobility. And if you want to learn more about anything else under the automotive sun, please feel free to reach out to us at that same web address. We'll be back with more Fuel for Thought next month.